For the first time in 16 years, a delegation of about 6 to 7 government ministers converged in Cameroon's economic capital, Douala, to celebrate with the media. And of course, they accompanied the Minister of Communication, Issa Chiruma Bakari, who sojourned in Douala for almost 4 days. And for the first time ever since he was appointed the board chair of SOPECAM, that is the Cameroon News and Publishing Corporation, Joseph Anderson Lee paid a maiden visit to the external services of that department. In fact, he wanted to grapple with the operations, particularly in the littoral region. Welcome to News Retrospective 24/7 Roundup. During the short time he sojourned in Douala, Cameroon's Minister of Communication, Issa Chiruma Bakari, made preliminary statements on the challenges of the profession. In fact, he talked about the core values, and if the journalists must be respected, they then have to respect the ethics of the profession. He is a journalist. He is a veteran journalist, of course, retired but not tired. James Achanyi Fontem is my guest on today's edition of the program. Mr. James Achanyi Fontem, thanks for always being available anytime they knock at your doors.
It's me to thank you, Henry, for inviting me to come and share with you within the framework of the World Press Freedom Day.
How far have we gone? Or how long or how near have we come?
Well, we look at the press in Cameroon, we should say that it has progressed a lot. The press should be looked from the 1960s when we just got our independence. You know, there was a plural press, and this press was being controlled by the political parties that existed at that time. There were over 80 of them, and what they could publish only was connected to the politics of the organ that had this press. And finally, when these political parties disappeared and the country became united, we had a press that was government controlled, and after some time the same press was liberated because the private press or the independent news organs came up. And it came very timidly because the government was a little bit afraid of the newspapers that published information that the government media would not publish. And there was censorship, there was arrest of journalists, there was the suspension of newspapers. There was even the banning of circulation of some newspapers, but all that went on gradually, and the struggle of the press continued. And today we have a plural press that is almost free. It's true that there are still some loopholes because most of our media practitioners need recycling. The media landscape is expanding, but the formal training possibilities are getting reduced, and we think that this is a time we should call on those who are decision makers, those who need the press, those who like the press, to find a way of getting those who are in the independent press to be trained so that they could publish what we will know as decent news, news without bias, news that is not provocative, news that would maintain peace.
Well, it's interesting to know that that we have really evolved, but I know that the minister made a declaration that there is no journalist as of now in prison for having goofed along the editorial lines.
The statement the minister did by saying that there is no journalist in prison is not enough, because if journalists are not in prison and journalists do not have the tools to be effective I think the game is not over. What the minister should be thinking about at the 21st century, since we are talking of modern technology for communication used for circulation of information, the minister should make it possible that those who are in the profession should have access to these tools and use these tools freely in a way that they will be serving the community. There are quite a number of programs that should be done. We know UNESCO, the Commonwealth of Learning, Frederick Schilberg Foundation, they are organizations that are working hand in hand with the press to drive the press towards a more developmental end, like the Farm Radio International. We want to encourage the government to support these international and national organizations that are working to develop the skills of the press, because as science evolves, the strategy for communication is changing, and if the media practitioners are not being trained on how to use the tools that have been made available, it would mean that we're lacking behind.
Well, we shall come back to you. Just time for us to have these two reports on how the Press Freedom Day was celebrated, how Cameroon evaluated the Press Freedom Day, and of course the Cameroon media between the hammer and the nail. Let's have this report, courtesy Tarike Divine, Annette Efete Mutumba.
The media in Cameroon has come a long way, and obviously the road ahead appears even longer to attain satisfactory professionalism, according to observers. The country counts some 100 radios and TVs and over 500 newspapers whose frequency on the newsstands depends on the moment in time and issues at stake. With this year's presidential poll, several new productions will mushroom and then vamoose after amassing several millions in bribe. While the public media reiterate their government praise singing, the private establishments characterized by stinking poverty and vulnerable workers tend to be intensely anti-government, and so politicians and businessmen are taking advantage, ensuring that journalists and even very influential ones are at their beck and call for a few thousand francs. Observers say respect for ethics in the country's media landscape has hit the bottom, and media organs even get at each other's throat to preserve their interests. Meantime, owners of media structures continue to prey on the passion of ambitious budding talent, giving them space to practice and paying them chicken feed or nothing at all.
20 years after the inception of May 3 as World Press Freedom Day by UNESCO, journalists the world over continue to fight for their rights. As Communication Minister Issa Chiroma Bakari presided over the official commemoration in Douala, this May 3, media owners, journalists and other stakeholders evaluated the media landscape in Cameroon.
Satisfied with what has been done, what has been achieved 20 years after, satisfied with measures taken both by the national government and by international organizations, satisfied with measures taken by other development partners towards ensuring the safety, the professionalism of the media, professionalism of the journalists.
Mr. Chiroma declared in Cameroon no journalist is presently imprisoned, condemned in the course of exercising his or her duty, except for civil matters not related to the exercise of duty. He stated equally that Cameroon's press freedom is greatly admired abroad, what met with mixed feelings.
The government doesn't have enough political will, you know, to make this business grow. Maybe because the government is afraid of a strong press. But I want to say that if a government, a state has a strong press, it's a good thing for the government too.
As Cameroon commemorates the sedition, counting strides made so far, much is still to be done.
Obstacles, again, still with responsibility of the media. how the journalists treat information, how they handle critical issues that touch national security, that touch individual lives of the citizens, is what normally we should look for towards eradicating.
An impressive number of ministers came to Douala to commemorate with pressmen. On this day, journalists have been told they are the nation's watchmen through their pens, words and images, and by so doing they have to promote peace, development and social cohesion, more especially this pre-election period.
Welcome back. In fact, you said something when the 1990 laws on communication came. Of course, we are still practicing, and maybe you were one of those who contributed. Your voices counted at the time. How many times did you face threats, of having run a story without necessarily, or probably stories that might have hurt quite a lot of people? Or say, how many times were you detained? Because we know it was a very common phenomenon at the time, when you people were really at the beat of things.
Henry, I should be frank to tell you that I served as a government broadcast journalist for 30 years before retiring, and throughout my career I traveled throughout the country. When I was recruited in 1975 in Yaoundé, I was sent to Garoua, and each time I stayed in a particular environment for 3 years. I was transferred. This made me to understand that as a journalist, you needed to change places, to learn new things, because you meet new people, new habits, new culture, and you derive new techniques for serving people. I took English to Garoua in 1976. At the time, we were broadcasting in Garoua only in French and in Hausa. Many people would say they listened to Luncheon Date, but before I arrived Garoua, Luncheon Date was broadcast on tape. It wasn't live. When I did the experimental phase for 2 years, which I consider was another method of censorship, very few people who listened to Luncheon Date knew that Luncheon Date was done on tape. But in the third year, we started reporting live. And from Garoua, I was moved to the East Province. And at the time I was sent to the East Province, there were no roads, no electricity, no decent housing. In fact, when I arrived Betua, the Betua Park, I asked the driver whether we have arrived, because
it means you did not know.
In fact, it was more just a village at the time. And if we look at the evolution of issues, a journalist would not be assessing information if there is no good road infrastructure, if there is no good telephone. We used to use telex at the same time. We used to use the nodar to send messages at the time. Today, we have the possibility of communicating with e-port instruments, with mobile phones. We can send an image now by internet. Those are changes that have taken place. You were asking how many times I was threatened or arrested. I was never arrested throughout my career, but what happened is that I reported very carefully until 1992, when I announced the results of the presidential elections from Kongsamba. Many people felt that I should not have announced those elections, but having been trained by the BBC as a station manager, and knowing what decision making is when it comes to publishing information, I realized that it was important to get the people to know what happened when people voted. And you would have realized that in 1992, it's because the presidency had special communication means that I used in Kongsamba to send my report to Yaoundé, and those who listened to the report did not know that I was not in Douala. Obviously, that would have been my first opportunity to be arrested.
At the time you were ebbing out of the profession.
Yes, and incidentally, I left Kongsamba, and I was traveling back by bus, not knowing that the secret police was looking for me. And I traveled, I arrived my home tired, I went to sleep. I did not go to the station, because if I went to the station that evening, obviously I was going to be arrested. And as time passed, the dust settled, and people now started understanding that the report that I did was correct, because when I received a query of why I announced the election results, I did not understand why they're asking me why I should have announced the election results, which were published by the officials in an area where I covered elections. And being trained by the BBC, the password is that if you are a BBC correspondent, you have to keep the message that the truth must be told. And I didn't see how I would keep the truth without saying it. And that was the only incident that I felt menaced. But I would say that something happened which was strange, because the general manager of Cameroon Radio Television at the time sent a message, a telex message, to the chief of station who was controlling news in the littoral at the time, asking that I should be sent to the provincial delegation of communication at the time. And when I arrived, the provincial delegation of communication, Mr. Francis Kinge, who was the delegate, said, but we don't see anything in wrong in your report, and they are sending you to the delegation. You are a broadcaster. There is no radio in the delegation. How could they have taken such a decision? They pleaded that I should go back to the radio, but I told them I'm a journalist. I can still work from the delegation.
Well, it's interesting experience there from James Achani Fontem. In fact, it was a household name during midday 3 p.m. news in Cameroon. We shall be coming back. Let's have the story on the visit of the board chair of the Cameroon News and Publishing Corporation, SOPECAM, that is Joseph Anderson Lee, who was equally here in Douala to sojourn with the press. In fact, he visited the decentralized structure of SOPECAM, grappling with the operations of that department. Let's have this report. After his appointment as the board chair of the Cameroon News and Publishing Agency, Joseph Anderson Lee has paid his first official visit to the Littoral Regional Branch of SOPECAM. Mr. Lee's visit coincided with the 18th edition of the World Press Freedom Day on May 4, where he was part of a delegation of government ministers who accompanied the Minister of Communication to Douala. The working visit permitted the board chair of SOPECAM to take stock of the working conditions of his collaborators. Regional Chief Alex Mimbang himself, appointed a few months ago, made rounds with the board chair through all the services of SOPECAM. The major problems was that of enough space and that of the optical fiber, which is lagging. And it was quickly mentioned that a solution of the optical fiber will be made available immediately SOPECAM moves out of its present confines. Welcome back, James Achani Fontem. Things have really evolved. Now the law is regulating things, especially at this dispensation of political dispensation, where it's a very capital electoral year. Don't you think that it is nice for the government to put some, breaking mechanisms in order to avoid journalists go off the rail? That is the law. They don't have to produce even intermediary results, the trends, the tendencies.
Henry, I should be able to tell you something, that communication has evolved in a way that no single individual or government is going to block the circulation of news. If the government press is not going to announce it, and the independent press in Cameroon is not going to announce it, the foreign press we have in Cameroon will announce it. And you know, the principle in communication is the journalist that gets the news out first is the good journalist. So I heard
with everything treated.
I heard one senior journalist saying during the World Press Freedom Day that people should be selective of the news that they should give to their listeners or viewers, and he did not explain that when we're talking of being selective, it means the report should be balanced. Because if a report is balanced and there is truth in it, you'll be telling people that this is the reality. So we should look for solutions to the problem, because as I did say, news is anything uncommon in a common place, and journalists are looking for something new. And if a journalist comes out with news that is not already got by other media or those who are censoring or controlling media, it should not be that the journalist has committed a crime. Because if information is not given, very often you would not know how to start studying to solve a problem. I would take the case of the elections we were talking about in 1992. If I did not announce those results, the results of the whole elections would not have been rigged. And it is because I announced the results that the government understood, after having looked at the voting across the nation, that the person in power who was hoping to do it did not do it. And the announcement of the results also led to the government taking a decision, which is virtually happening today when there are elections. If a minister does not make it possible for his party to win within his constituency, he quits from the government.
Let's come to the African Radio Research Program, that program analysis that is in 5 African countries, including Cameroon. We are talking about new information and communication tools, you know, to facilitate communication in journalism.
Yeah, while I talk about the African Radio Research Program analysis, which is ongoing in 5 African countries, that is Kenya, Tanzania, Malawi, Ghana, and Cameroon. I would want to say this is a program that is being done by Farm Radio International, which is an independent non-profit making organization in Canada. The founder of Farm Radio International, Dr. George Atkins, was a retired Canadian Broadcasting Corporation journalist who traveled through Africa for several years and realized that Africa had a problem of sharing information with those who improve on their livelihoods. And when you hear farm radio, we are talking to farmers, using radio to talk to farmers, just like the program that we're carrying on in Libialem today, which is promoted by the Commonwealth of Learning from Vancouver, Canada. We have to use community media to address issues that concern the rural population and get the rural population to be involved in the production of programs that teach. And the African Radio Research Program analysis is coming up because it has been discovered that there are several radio stations in Africa. 300 community radio stations are already networking with Farm Radio International, but hardly has any radio station carried a research on monitoring. Who listens to us? What do they like in our programs? What would they have liked that we should broadcast, and what are the difficulties that the stations have, our stations have in doing these programs. And that is why the African Radio Research Program Analysis is going to come out, and the information that is going to be collected in these 5 different countries will be put together and shared throughout Africa, so that the radio stations that are performing would be able to know their strengths and weaknesses, and they will be able to know what they are doing and what they are not doing, how the others are doing, and learn from the others. And I think this is going to improve on the quality of programs content. It's another mode of getting the listeners to be involved in the production of programs, because today we're talking of modernization, we're talking of equity in communication, we're talking of gender, women and men working together and having equal rights. All these issues, health, the livelihood of the population is very important, and you can solve problems only if you have carried out a diagnosis. And that is why the African Radio Research Program Analysis is going to come out, and you can be very sure that when the results will come out, it will be shared. We're going to organize a one-day workshop to share the content of the research in Cameroon before handing the report to Canada, where everything will be assembled, and they would come out with one package that will be returned to all the countries that participated and shared with other countries that did not have the opportunity to be involved.
Well, thanks 100 times, Mr. James Achanyi Fontem, for that very brilliant and explicit contribution. It's always a pleasure to always have you anytime to talk, especially as we need to inform our televiewers. Thanks, televiewers, for having watched this edition of the program News Retrospective 24/7 Roundup. On behalf of all and sundry, our technicians, correspondents, and collaborators inclusive, it's goodbye from all.